Welcome to our forum with Wei Jingsheng. We at Harvard are very pleased and honored to welcome here Wei Jingsheng. The visit is sponsored by Kennedy School, by the Fairbanks Center, by Harvard University in general. This, as you know, has been a great year for Harvard for discussing issues related to China. We've welcomed President Jiang Zemin. We welcomed Wan Dan. We had a full week of activities at the opening of the Asia Center to discuss Chinese and other matters connected with Asia. And today, as you know, we have Wei Jingsheng. I'd like to spend just a brief time giving some of you who don't know his background some idea of the context and person that is appearing here today. I think you all know that he's a man of extraordinary courage and conviction. He came to the attention of the world in 1978. If you stand in Tiananmen and look toward the Forbidden City, over to the left a ways, there is a wall. In 1978 and 79, there was a new permissiveness in Beijing that allowed people to post their views in what became, in effect, a giant bulletin board. And the wall later came to be known as Democracy Wall. It became Democracy Wall 2 years after the death of Chairman Mao and the end of the Cultural Revolution. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping had just come to power. People could post their views on Mao and the Cultural Revolution. In early December, weeks after the posting began, Wei Jingsheng made his first visit to the wall. He is reported to be so inspired that in a single day, he wrote what has now become famous as the fifth modernization, democracy. A friend posted it on the wall at 2 a.m. in the morning of December 5th, 1978. In this article, Wei Jingsheng argued that Deng Xiaoping's call for the four modernizations in agriculture, industry, science, and the military would not bring real transformation to China without modernization in a fifth area, democracy. He argued that while the Communist Party called for democracy, it itself claimed to speak for the people, but that the people were more like faithful servants standing at attention, and he wanted the people to claim their rights. When Wei Jingsheng was born in 1950, his parents had already been longtime members of the Communist Party. His father joined in 1930 as a secret member, and his mother joined a few years later as a student. Wei himself grew up as a committed communist. He attended an elite school, a junior high school, attached to People's University. As a Red Guard traveling throughout the country between 1966 to 69, he had expressed his disappointment and distress at the poverty that he saw throughout the country. As a soldier in the People's Liberation Army from 1969 to 1973, he found himself serving in the Northwest, and while there he found that he had to defend the granaries against hungry people who were seeking food. While in the Army, he had also become engaged to a Tibetan woman whose father later was criticized and put in jail. And as a result of that experience, Wei became very sympathetic with the plight of Tibetans. Wei Jingsheng's mother was criticized in the Cultural Revolution. She was forced to write continuous confessions. She contracted cancer and without treatment died in 1976. His father had been criticized earlier in the anti-rightist campaign. In 1978, once Wei posted his original article on the fifth modernization, he became a committed activist, spending less time at the Beijing Zoo, where he earned his living as an electrician. He began publishing in January of the following year a magazine, Explorations. He continued expressing his views forthrightly, even after March 16th, when Deng Xiaoping in a secret speech ordered the crackdown on the Democracy Wall. Not only did Wei continue writing, but he used Deng's name personally, and he mentioned it in his continuing articles. On March 29th, a few days later, Wei was in solitary confinement, awaiting a trial which was held in October 16th. He was sentenced without public airing for 15 years. He was allowed to watch in jail TV, to read and write at a later time, but he refused to waver in his anti-government views. His prison letters, published under the title of The Courage to Stand Alone, reflect his courage and determination. He became known to foreigners concerned with human rights after his article had appeared on Democracy Wall, and after being in jail on September 14, 1993, 9 days before the International Olympic Committee was to vote on Beijing's bid to host the Olympic Games in 2000, Wei was released, his release from prison was announced. He was told he was prohibited from speaking to the media, but he continued to do so. John Shattuck, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights, met Wei Jingsheng while he was out of prison for dinner on February 27, 1994. Many of us here know John Shattuck when he was vice president of Harvard University, and his wife, Ellen Hume, was on the faculty at the Kennedy School. Shortly after Shattuck met Wei, Wei was again put in detention. He was again tried in December 1995 and sentenced to 14 years of imprisonment and 3 years of deprivation of human rights. On November 16th, in the context of continuous foreign pressure, when China was showing that it could be responsive to an improvement of relations with the United States, Wei was released on November 16th. He arrived in New York on November 21st. Harvard immediately invited him to come, and we're pleased that he's here today to accept our invitation. Wei Jingsheng.
刚才傅高义先生已经把我的过去介绍得非常详细了，所以关于过去我就没什么可以说的了。我准备说说未来的事情。
Because Professor Vogel has already spoken in detail about my past, I don't have much to say about the past, so I'll speak about the future.
大家都知道，我们是为了争取中国的民主，为了争取在中国保障人权而进行斗争的。
As everyone knows, we're struggling for democracy in China and for human rights in China.
但是现在大家很多人在议论说，我们中国争取民主的这些朋友们，就是通常所说的民运人士，彼此之间有很多的争论，非常不团结。在不团结的情况下，大家怎么才能继续进行斗争呢？
But there's a lot of controversy. It's known that among the people who are in the democracy movement, there's a lot of debate and disagreement. And so people will say, how can you achieve your goals not being united?
我出来将近半年的时间，我在美国、在加拿大、在欧洲走了12个国家。在这个12个国家里，我看到的情况可能和大家在报纸上看到的情况不完全一样。
And since I've come out from China about 6 months, I've been to 12 countries, the US, Canada, so on and so forth, and I've seen things going on. Maybe I've seen something different from what the rest of you have seen.
我在这12个国家的大部分地方看到的是，中国搞民主运动的人，包括各个组织之间，其实非常团结。
Actually, I've seen, mostly what I've seen is great unity among different people in this democracy movement and among the organizations.
在很多地方，甚至各个组织之间的这个界限已经没有了，大家就都在一起工作，已经不知道谁是哪个组织的了。
And so much so that even some of the boundaries between the separate organizations have disappeared, and people are working together for the same goal.
可是大家肯定会说，不对呀，我们看到的情况不是这样啊。我觉得这个差别可能是因为大家主要是从报纸上看东西。
But you might say this is not right. We see something else, something different, and I think that that's because you're looking at the newspapers.
大家都知道，新闻记者呢有他们自己的习惯， 就哪个地方最热闹，他们就专门报到那个最热闹的地方，其他地方他们就看不见了。
As we all know, reporters have this habit of looking at the places that are most in turmoil and so on, and when there's not a bunch of turmoil going on, they can't see it.
结果总是有那么几个人在那儿吵吵闹闹的，好像很热闹，所以报纸总是在报道那几个人，于是给大家留下一个错误的印象，好像中国人非常不团结。
And so there are always a few people having arguments and fighting. And so the newspapers give people the impression, the mistaken impression, that the Chinese people are always fighting.
上个星期我在华盛顿的时候，在肯尼迪中心又有很多人问我，中国人团结问题怎么解决？这时候有一位多年从事人权工作的美国人告诉我说：“老魏，你不要担心团结问题，我告诉你，其实缅甸人吵得比你们还厉害。”
Last week in D.C., people were asking me again, how are you going to solve this question of unity? And an American who had a lot of experience in China said, "Don't worry, Mr. Wei, the Burmese are even more full of strife than the Chinese."
但是从另一个方面看，我们中国人之间确实也存在着团结方面也确实存在很多问题。
But on the other hand, we do have a lot of problems with unity in the Chinese community.
虽然只有少数的几个人在那儿挑头，今天骂这个，明天吵那个，但是呢，就有很多人有点人心惶惶，似乎是把这种事情，他们相信这些人的说法。
There are the minority who do say curse and swear and yell at other people and make fights and arguments, but some people just get panicked by this and they really believe those people who are in the minority.
所以我觉得我们确实有必要研究一下这个团结的问题。
So we do have to study this question of unity.
当然，有一方面，共产党他不会闲着，他们会弄很多特务来搞破坏活动。比如说，那个两德合并以后，就德国统一以后，人们在东德的档案里发现，东德反对派的人士有一多半是在给东德的特务机关工作，所以这个有特务一点都不奇怪。
And so, of course, the communist parties will not be taking a rest, taking a vacation, and there will be spies looking out and investigating all these things, as there were, for example, when the two Germanys were unified. There are always going to be, it's not a strange thing that there will be spies.
所以我觉得有特务破坏并不是最主要的原因，最主要的是我们为什么会受到这些特务的挑拨离间。
So I don't think that the main reason there's disunity is because of spies, but rather how can we be, why is it that we are swayed by these people and end up in disunity?
我觉得主要有两个原因，非常主要的原因造成了这种现象。一个就是大家对于我们中国自己的那个民主的前途呢，信心不是那么很足。另一个原因呢，就是由于我们在西方生活的一般来说比较安定了以后，慢慢的就失去了在国内的老百姓大家都有的那种危机感。
I think there are two reasons really for this disunity. One is that that we Chinese people do not have enough confidence in democracy and in the future of our nation, and the other is that as we live in the West and in more stable conditions, we gradually lose the sense of urgency and crisis that the ordinary people in China have.
很多朋友可能会说，不对呀，老魏你说的不对。其实我们对中国的民主前途很有信心。
Some people will say, that's not right. We are actually very confident about democracy in China, the future of democracy in China.
但是我发现很多朋友呢，虽然从理论上讲，大家非常有信心，都知道中国肯定迟早要走向一个民主的前途，可是，在现实中呢，往往就很缺乏信心。
But I find that although most people theoretically have confidence in the theoretically that sooner or later there will be democracy in China. They don't have much confidence in the actual reality.
比如大家都知道我最近半年以来在做什么事情，就是西方国家，包括美国的政府，他们在逐渐的降低他们在人权方面的，在中国有关中国的人权方面的立场，所以说我一直在批评他们。
For example, you all know what I've been doing for the last 6 months since I've been here is that the U.S. government and all Western governments have kind of lowered their human rights standards in terms of China.
他们不顾中国的现实，也不顾这个自己美国人自己的价值观念，他们在支持共产党，同时在说中国的人权状况怎样怎样好。
And they ignore the actual reality in China, and they ignore the values of their own people, and just are concerned about supporting China and saying that the human rights situation is fine, is better in China.
我们既然是在从事中国的民主运动，我们在关心中国的人权，那么我们当然就必须批评西方国家现在这种态度。
So as people who are working in the democracy movement of China, of course, we naturally will criticize these governments, such as the U.S. government.
但是我发现一遇到具体的事情，我们的很多朋友就信心不足了，他们都在劝我，老魏呀，你不能这样批评西方政府。
But I've discovered that when we run up against actual situations, that people lose their confidence and they say, "Oh, Wei, you can't criticize the U.S. government."
他们好像有一种错误的观念，就是我们好像现在要依靠西方政府，要请求西方政府来帮助我们。我觉得这种态度是错误的。
I think they have a mistaken view that we have to rely on Western governments to help us and rely on Western governments for our goals, but I think this is absolutely wrong.
我们现在在西方国家，我们在一个我们相信它是民主制度的国家，所以我们就要用民主的方法和民主国家的政府打交道。
I think we are now in Western countries where we believe that there is democracy, so we need to use democratic methods to do our work.
当然，又有一些朋友说了，但是西方国家的很多政府官员，他们跟中国共产党的官员是非常友好的，所以说你这样批评他们，他们肯定会不高兴。他们甚至可能把你弄到像前苏联的那个布科夫斯基一样。
But some people say that a lot of officials, American government officials, are very friendly with Chinese government officials, and if you criticize them and criticize Chinese government, they'll be very unhappy, and maybe they'll look upon you as they have some dissidents of the former Soviet Union.
我告诉他们说，这也没什么关系。既然我们相信这个制度是一个民主制度，我们就要用民主的方法在这个制度中和人打交道。如果我们失败了，那我们还要和美国人民和欧洲人民一起来保卫这个民主制度。我们不仅仅保卫中国的民主制度，不仅在中国争取民主制度，我们可能也需要和美国的朋友一起来保卫美国的民主制度。
And I say to those people, that's okay. That because we're in democratic countries, we have to use democratic methods to relate to the governments of these countries. And if we fail, then together with the people of these countries, we'll have to protect democracy in these countries, not just Chinese democracy in China, but say, for example, with the American people to protect democracy all over the world.
我觉得我们在民主的国家里，我们主要不是靠请求几个政府官员来帮助我们，我们的朋友，我们主要依靠的是西方国家的热爱民主的广大的人民，而不是少数的官员。
I think in democratic countries, we can't rely on begging from government officials our freedom and democracy, but rather we must depend on the people of these countries to win our democracy and freedom.
当然，有些朋友也劝我了，说西方的人民他们并不了解中国的情况，他们并不着急中国民主还是不民主，他们最主要关心自己的钱。我在很多国家听到这种说法。
Now, other friends of mine say that actually people in the Western countries are not concerned with democracy and freedom in China. They don't really care. All they care about is making money on their own. A lot of people have told me this.
我对他们说，我觉得关心钱是正常的，不但西方国家的人最关心自己腰包里的钱，中国人也一样。
And I say to them, to be concerned about money in your own pocket is natural, and it's not just Westerners who are concerned this way, but Chinese people the same.
但是我们除了钱以外，我们还有其他的生活目标，我们还有需要其他的权利，在这些方面，中国人基本的权利都被剥夺了，所以他们现在要起来斗争，起来为自己争取一个民主的制度。
But aside from material comfort and material things, we have other goals that we live for and other rights that we are in need of. And because Chinese people have been deprived of their basic rights, that's why they're standing up to win them back.
因为美国和其他西方国家的人，他们天生的就能够享受这种民主制度。他们很多人，特别是年轻人，一出生就享受到各种各样权利，所以他们不认为这种权利是一种非常紧迫的东西，非常重要的东西，这也是可以理解的。
And because in America, for example, people enjoy democracy as democratic rights as a birthright, and so they don't see the importance and the urgency of democratic rights.
但是到西方国家来生活的一些中国人，他们由于也在这个地方也能享受到各种各样的权利，他们如果也认为这些权利不那么重要，我觉得就已经不太正常了，不太可以理解了。
But on the other hand, if Chinese people come to the West and they can likewise enjoy democratic rights and this kind of freedom, but they still don't see the importance of these things, then I think that's not so normal or understandable.
但是实际上，由于共产党的那种消息封锁，许多从中国出来的人，离开中国时间不长的人，他们也不一定完全了解广大的中国的老百姓，普通的老百姓，他们在受到什么样的压迫和什么样的剥削。
But because of the information barriers to information that the Communist Party puts on things, a lot of Chinese people coming out of China, even if they haven't been out of China for all that long, just really don't understand what's going on with the ordinary people in China and what kinds of pressures and suffering is going on.
所以他们对于中国人争取民主的斗争呢，有的时候也不是很理解，他们缺乏一种危机感，一种紧迫感。
And so they also lack this sense of urgency about the human rights of ordinary Chinese people.
所以我希望更多的中国朋友能够更多的了解中国的情况，特别是通过你们自己在国内的那些社会关系，你们问一问中国的普通农民、普通工人，他们是怎么过日子的，他们受到了一些什么样的压迫，多了解一些这些以后，你们就会觉得我们中国人争取民主自由确实是一种非常紧迫的任务。
So my hope is that Chinese people outside of China will really try to understand the actual situation of ordinary people, ordinary peasants, ordinary workers in China, and once you understand that situation, that you will understand that it's really urgent that the Chinese people strive for democracy and freedom.
因为国内的那些普通的老百姓，包括那些大家比较看不起的、没有文化的、没读过书的普通的农民，他们现在都要起来争取自己的权利了。如果在这个时候还说，中国的民主和自由不是一种紧迫的任务，那么我觉得你这种说法可能离中国的所有的老百姓距离就太远了。
And so that if we don't see that ordinary people, the common people in China, even including the people that we ordinarily might look down on, such as people who don't have much education, workers and peasants and so on, if we see that these ordinary people are striving for their human rights, for their democratic rights, if we still say that this is not an urgent, important situation, then I think we're way too far from the ordinary people.
所以我觉得中国人不团结的一个重要原因就是缺乏这种危机感，缺乏和老百姓一样的思考问题的这种立场。
So I think that the main reason then for the lack of unity in this movement is the lack of a sense of urgency and crisis, and also standing from a different point of view, being not having the ordinary people's point of view.
其实我小的时候，我和大家也差不多，也不太了解中国老百姓的情况。但是，一旦我了解到普通老百姓在受着什么样的压迫，他们在一种什么样的状况下生活，了解到这些以后，我就下定决心，一定要为他们，为我们自己的13亿的同胞争取到一个和西方人一样的民主的、自由的、繁荣的社会制度。
But actually, when I was young, I, like all of you, I didn't really understand the conditions of the ordinary people of China. But as soon as once I did see and understand the kinds of oppression and lack of freedom that ordinary people were under, then I determined in my own mind to struggle for obtaining the kind of freedom and democratic rights and human rights for these ordinary Chinese people, the 1.3 billion Chinese people, just that all could enjoy the same kind of freedom.
谢谢大家的耐心。
And thank you very much for your patience.
I think most of you know the Kennedy School ARCO Forum practice. You stand up behind the microphone and wait your turn. As some of you know, Mr. Wei was in a hospital yesterday in Canada for heart examination, but he has agreed, he feels that he can endure maybe 30 minutes or so of questioning. And so we may have to call it off around 1:30, but if he feels up to it, we may go on a few minutes after that. First question.
魏先生你好，欢迎您到哈佛。My name.
可以那个介绍自己名字吧。
Sure. My name is Joanne Pham. I'm a second year at the Kennedy School. My question is, since you came out of China, you've made some comments on Taiwan's future and that you don't think it's appropriate for Taiwan to for Taiwan independence. Taiwan has emerged as the newest democracy in the world. Should Taiwanese people decide to determine their own future by democratic means, would you support Taiwan's self-determination?
– 我想前天晚上我还和几个台湾独立联盟的朋友在一起，在一个酒会上。
Oh, night before last, I was having dinner with some friends from the Taiwan independence movement.
我觉得我们之间意见虽然不完全相同，可是并不是说就不能够商量。
And even though we had some differences in our views, we could discuss them. And
我对他们讲到我对台湾独立的问题的看法。我认为，第一，任何一部分的人民都有独立的权利，这是一个很基本的权利，这一点是必须肯定的。
And so we talked about various issues. One, I agree with them that any section of a people has the basic right to be independent.
但是呢，我们有的时候也不得不考虑政治的现实。
But we also have to consider the political realities at the same time.
我问他们，我说，在共产党这种蛮不讲理的、不尊重任何人权利的政治体制就在你的旁边，你能独立吗？
And I asked them, if with a Communist Party run country just neighboring you, can you be independent?
当然，我不逼着他回答，我跟着就说了第二个问题。
I didn't press them for an answer right away. I talked about the second question next.
第二个问题就是说，如果我们现在不能团结起来，为整个中国建设一个民主的政治，不能使整个中国的这个政权尊重其他人的权利的话，那么你这个独立实际上也是不可能的。所以你们现在应该跟我们团结起来，争取整个中国的民主。
So I said that if we cannot unite the whole of China for a democratic system, a democratic regime, and respect other people's democratic rights and other people's rights, then you really can't be independent. And so you should unite with us and work for uniting all of China.
我的意思是，你要想讲理，你就应该找一个讲理的对象。我们在整个中国建设了一个讲理的这个民主政治之后，你再想独立，那你那个时候谈这个问题就比较现实了。
My point being that if you're looking for a rational discussion, then you have to find a person to discuss with who's also rational. So.
不过我说，我估计啊，到那个时候，真正到了那个时候啊，可能没有几个台湾人真正的想独立了。
But I think that at that time there really won't be very many Taiwan people who want independence.
他们也和刚才一样啊，也笑起来了。实际上就是这样的。
And that's the reality.
Next question, we urge you to keep them brief because there are an awful lot of people waiting, so please introduce yourself and give a brief question.
给魏先生，我是西藏人，我有2个很简单的问题，我没有办法，因为我说中文说的那么不好，但是可能我的中文比你的藏文好。
那这肯定的。
第一个问题是，你对西藏的问题、西藏的历史跟前途，你有什么看法？第二个问题是，这个周末你有机会跟那个达赖喇嘛说话，那时候你想告诉他什么？
I'm Tibetan person, and I'm sorry that my Chinese isn't very good, but it's probably better than your Tibetan. Yes. And so I want to ask you 2 simple questions. What is your view of Tibetan history and future? And second is, you will have a chance to meet with Dalai Lama this weekend. What are you going to tell him?
其实关于西藏的历史，因为西藏历史是比较特殊的一种历史。很难用其他的各个国家的历史规律来进行准确的描述，所以这个要是讲得详细一点，恐怕得这么厚一本书。
As far as Tibetan history is concerned, it's very unusual and hard to describe in sort of the normal historical terms. So if one were to try in detail, you'd have a very thick tome.
我认为西藏呢，西藏人民呢，过去一直在西藏地方政府，就是自己民族的政府的统治之下，而并不是在中国中央政府的统治之下，这一点必须得分得非常清楚。
So I think we have to make a distinction between when Tibet was governed by its national government and by the Chinese central government.
第二点就是说，西藏从清朝初年开始。那个时候就开始跟中国的中央政权处于一种，好像是正在互相合并的这样一种过程之中。实际上到了1949年之前的时候，就是西藏的地方政府和那个中国的中央政府呢，实际上处于一种基本上快要合并到一块儿，但是还没有真正合并到一块儿这样一种状况。
And the second point is that from the beginning of the Qing dynasty, that it seems like there was a process of merging Chinese central regime and Tibetan regime, and that this process was going on. And right before 1949, it looked like this process was almost complete, that they were almost merged.
所以共产党说西藏从来就是我们的领土的一部分，这个说法肯定是错的。
So that for the Chinese Communist Party to say that that Tibet has always been a part of our territory is wrong.
但是另一方，西方有些学者说，西藏从来就是独立的，这样的说法肯定也是错的。
But on the other hand, it's also incorrect, as some Western scholars say, that Tibet was always independent.
不过我们可以把历史的问题放在一边，让历史学家研究的，我们不必抢人家的饭碗。
So let's leave that to the historians to argue.
明天我可能会和达赖喇嘛在一起，比较详细的讨论一些问题。
And
不
when
是
I
明天10号9号9号。
when I meet with the Dalai Lama on the 9th, we will discuss some things in detail.
其实我们之间已经讨论了一些问题了。
We have already had discussions on some issues.
我们认为，我们双方都认为，我们现在藏族人和汉族人必须加强团结，在整个中国争取一个民主的制度。这样呢，西藏的这个问题，不管是独立还是不独立，还是自治这样的问题呢，才有条件去解决。在共产党现在这种蛮不讲理的统治下，跟刚才那位台湾朋友提的问题一样，你没法跟他讲理。
So we have had our discussions, and both sides agree that really the important thing is unity, and that to the Tibetan people and Chinese people to strive together for whether Tibet should be independent or autonomous, and all of those things to create the conditions to strive together for democracy and freedom in China for all the people. That unity is the important thing.
我想在这些大的原则问题上，我们没有什么分歧。我们过2天可能主要讨论的这些具体怎样合作这样的问题。
And so I think that in principle we really don't have any important differences, and that what we will be discussing is how we can collaborate and work together.
Thank you. My name is Nahid Nenshi. I'm a graduate student here at the Kennedy School. Excuse me. Mr. Wei, first of all, thank you for coming today. Your life is an inspiration and a beacon to all of us. I wanted to ask you about the visit of President Jiang Zemin to the United States this fall, specifically here to Harvard. When he came to visit, many argued, myself included, that inviting him in this way would actually hurt the cause of democracy and of human rights in your country. Others argued that this kind of constructive engagement was the only way to help China become more democratic and have a better appreciation for human rights. In your opinion, what can those of us in the West do to best help your people in their struggle?
你们去年秋天在哈佛做的那些事情啊，我到美国以后都听说了，但是我们在电视上，我们只看到哈佛有一个欢迎江泽民的那个节目。
What you did last fall, I heard about it when I arrived in the States, but on TV, what we saw in China was only the welcoming Jiang Zemin part.
共产党为什么不敢让中国人民知道你们在这边抗议江泽民呢？这就说明，实际上你们这种抗议对他们来说就是一种巨大的压力。
Why did the Chinese Communist Party not dare to let the Chinese people see that there were protests? I think this proves that your protests were a big source of pressure for them.
你们代表美国人民表达了一种强烈的意见，这种意见呢，共产党可能假装不知道，但是他不可能不注意到。
And you, you represented the American people, strongly voicing your views, and the Chinese Communist Party might have pretended not to know that this was going on, but they couldn't.
可以说，世界各国这个人民，他们关心中国人民的前途，所做的这些各种各样的事情，包括抗议，包括其他的许多活动，都是对中国人民的一种最实际的支持。实际上，我们在中国这些政治犯的这个待遇，在监狱里的待遇，也都和这些有关系。
Actually, I think all protests and expressions of opinion this way, but on the part of people all over the world, are very concrete ways of supporting us and and also the political prisoners, the treatment of political prisoners inside China was also very much affected by protests in the West.
也就是说，你们给共产党制造的这些压力，迫使共产党不敢放开手来迫害这些政治犯，也不敢放开手来迫害中国的那些要求民主、要求自由的老百姓。
In other words, that your pressure, the pressure that you've put on the Chinese Communist Party has prevented them from, going all the way in terms of harsh treatment of political prisoners and harsh treatment of people who are striving for democracy and freedom.
但是现在又产生了一个新的问题，就是有人说，我有权代表所有的美国人，所以我们要和中国的共产党去友好。这样的情况可能会造成相反的效果。
But a new problem has come up. Some people say, I have the right to be friendly, to become friends with the Chinese government. And people, this might raise the opposite problem. Right, representing the American people, I have the right to be friendly.
所以说，现在美国老百姓要考虑考虑，除了我们的直接的行为支持中国人民，这种大声的呼吁以外，你们是不是也应该要求你们的政府和你们保持一致？
So that brings us to the point that in addition to your direct actions supporting us, might you not try to persuade your government to be on the people's side?
我知道上个月的时候，可能是上个月还是前一个月，是3月份的时候，美国议会曾经是以397-0要求美国政府表示支持中国人权的这个态度，但是美国政府拒绝了。所以现在的问题，中国的人权问题已经不仅仅是中国人的问题了，同时也是你们美国人的问题了。
So I heard that in March, was it, that Congress voted 397-0 to that the U.S. government should support human rights in China, but they didn't do this, and so now human rights has become a problem in the United States, not just China.
我正想有时间的时候找你们美国大学里的这些政治学家请教，为什么美国政府可以拒绝美国老百姓的要求？
So I want to talk with the political scientists in your universities and ask them, how come the U.S. government can fail to support the U.S. people this way?
看来我们得首先和美国老百姓一起找到一种方法，让这个政府能够代表美国的老百姓，然后我们才能有办法要求中国的政府也代表中国的老百姓。
So it looks like we have to get together with the ordinary people in America to see how we can make the U.S. government represent the U.S. people before we can ask the Chinese government to represent the Chinese people.
I'm Professor Patrick Wang from Northeastern University. 魏金生先生您好，我过去20多年来几乎天天看报纸，每次知道您在监狱中受的苦的时候，我经常为你祈祷，希望中共有一天会把你放出来。想不到今年居然实现了。
谢谢您。
非常高兴感谢您来，因为您代表的是中国人民为了民主自由的一种勇气。然后我觉得您的是这个启发是像俄国的萨卡诺夫、索尔尼辛，也像美国的 Martin Luther King。我的问题是在这里，您刚刚提到关于台独的事情，我是典型的从台湾长大的中国人，在台湾待了30多年，在美国在 Boston 就待了10多年，我可以很放心，请您放心，在台湾的2000万中国人里头，除了少数 1%、2% 的有野心的分子以外，绝大部分人跟中国没有隔阂，他们认为他们是中国人，而且他们之所以不想独立的原因，也不是因为是受了中国的压力，而事实上是血浓于水。这种感觉就好像夏威夷人对美国本土人，像阿拉斯加人对美国本土人，像九州人对本州人，像日本的4国对本州人一样，他们都是日本人，他们都是美国人，台湾人都是中国人。所以请您放心。
谢谢您。
我的问题是这样子，您刚刚提到说， 美国人民为什么可以让他的总统不代表他们？我觉得这个国家很可惜，这国家的道德在堕落中。为什么？你看克林顿现在是这样子啊，他又欺骗老百姓，欺骗自己太太，又违反国家宪法，他居然安然无事。这样的人快要访问中国了，是个很可怕的现象。所以，您有机会跟他谈话。
你很快结束了吧？
是的，我用快速的讲话。我非常着急，因为我跟你讲一样，有急迫感，我有中国民权的急迫感。以您有机会跟克林顿总统讲话的机会，请问您，克林顿总统抱着这种心情下去，他为了掩饰自己的个人丑闻、个人的性道德以及违反美国法律的各种事情，他很可能继续做出卖道德、出卖国格的事情。换言之，他并不会很遗憾出卖台湾、出卖中国人民的人权。请问您，在这个情况下，您要做克林顿总统做怎样的进谏、怎样的劝解，劝他不要做这种伤天害理的造孽的事情
Professor Wang is glad that Mr. Wei has been released and so on, and he is inspired by his example and courage and so on. And his question was how can the American president not represent the American people? Well, Professor Wang says that if the president's cheating on his wife and cheating on a lot of people, then I have a sense of urgency about this kind of president and his moral fiber. And so if he's doing this, then he can betray Taiwan, he can betray China. And what would you say to try to persuade him to mend his ways if you were to be face-to-face with President Clinton? Oh, he also said, by the way, I'm sorry, I should have said that in terms of Taiwan people, he said, we are all Chinese people, and the vast majority of Taiwan people consider themselves Chinese, and we're on the same side. But the question was about President Clinton.
我想如果有机会的话，我可能会把你的意见转达给克林顿先生。
If I have the opportunity, I'll tell President Clinton your objections.
不过上个星期我在华盛顿的时候，肯尼迪夫人告诉我，他们提前了2个多星期，为我约见克林顿先生。但是克林顿先生可能现在忙于要和北京拉关系，所以他跟我说他没有时间。
Last week when I was in Washington, D.C., I was told that they're really trying to get a meeting between myself and President Clinton, but apparently he's really busy with his upcoming trip to Beijing, so he was too busy.
不过我想没关系，你的意见其实很有意思，即使到克林顿先生退休之后跟他谈一谈，也很有意思。
But I think that's okay. I mean, your objections, your criticism is really very interesting, and even when he steps down, it's still interesting to talk about that.
因为我这次在西方国家走了很多国家以后，我发现西方民主制度有一个很致命的弱点。就是这些政府官员一般他们不愿意考虑4年以后的事情。
And I've been in the Western countries, a whole bunch of Western countries lately, and I've discovered that there's a real fatal flaw, weakness in your democratic system, and that is that the officials don't want to look at 4 years hence. I mean, after 4 years are over.
所以，当我跟他们谈政治问题的时候，谈这些政治战略问题的时候，甚至谈他们自己国家的利益的时候，他们好像都是很客气的，是，很好很好。但是，一转脸，他完全说的是另一套。
So that I find that when we're talking about politics, talking about political strategy and stuff, they, to my face, they're very polite, and even when talking about their own country's interests and so on, they're very polite and stuff. But then they turn their backs, and it's a whole different story.
不过您这个问题属于是人生道德的问题，我想他退了休也得要注意这些问题。
But you're talking about moral fiber, and that probably has to be dealt with even when he's not president.
上一次我见克林顿的时候，他曾经 约好了，说很愿意做我的长期的朋友。我想等他退休以后，他会想起来的。那个时候我会转达您的话。
So last time I was with President Clinton, he said he wanted to be friends, long-term friends. I think when he steps down, he'll remember that, and then I'll tell him what you said.
Yes.
My name is Junji, and I'm come from China. I'm a student of Harvard Law School. And I ask my question in Chinese. 我叫季军，我是从中国来的，我现在在哈佛法学院念书。魏先生，很谢谢您的那个讲话，而且这几年辛苦您了。作为年轻人来说，您是我们的榜样，非常感谢。然后我的问题是在您出来半年之后，在西方媒体有一些报道说是因为您在国外而不在中国国内，所以说您的价值和作用在民运中的价值和作用会降低很多很多。而且就您自己也在您的讲话中也谈到，就说如果离开了中国的话，失去了与中国人民息息相关的感觉的话，这种危机感和紧迫感也会降低。就这一点，当初您决定来美国的时候，您为什么做这样的决定，以及您现在这种状态，您是怎么想？就说您个人的将来是怎么样？这是一个问题。第二个问题是在。
这是一个问题。
So just one question. Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much for your words, and you are really a model for us here. And my question is that the media Western media has talked about the democracy movement, people outside of China, the role that they can play is very much reduced. And you yourself have talked about being separated from the Chinese people and so on. So how do you personally feel about your future in this regard?
其实这次我出国，大家都知道是一种被迫的出国。我一直都不想离开中国。
As you know, I was forced to leave China. I really didn't want to leave China.
但是我不想出国的原因，并不是怕自己贬值或者升值这样的问题，我从来不考虑这样的问题。我希望留在中国的主要原因呢，就是第一，我认为在那儿有很多的工作可做，最主要的是因为我特别喜欢和我自己国家的人民在一起。
And of course, the reason for my not wishing to leave China was not whether my prestige would rise or fall, but rather the reason I wanted to stay in China was because there's work to do, and also because I really like being with my own people.
当然，我也很喜欢美国人啊，
I
我
like
不是说不
Americans
喜欢美国人。
Like you too.
不过我更喜欢和自己的国家人民在
But I
一起。
like even more to be with my own people.
我认为这个贬值不贬值的问题呢，其实最重要的看你自己在做什么。你如果是一心一意的为了中国的老百姓争取他们的权利，不惜一切代价的为他们的权利和利益在斗争的话，我想在任何地方都会起很重要的作用。
As for prestige going up or down, I really think that has to do with what one does, one's own actions. If one is really working hard for the rights of the people, then wherever you are, you will be able to play an important role.
我们首先应该可以看到，在历史上，就是现代历史上，也有很多国家的反对派是先在国外搞工作，完了最后有条件的时候再返回到国内去进行工作，这是很正常的现象。
If we look at modern history, there are really many examples of people opposition to a government starting with people who are outside their country, and when they have the chance, they return to their own country to struggle. This is really quite common.
另外，前2年尤其最近2年以来，西方国家在中国人权的立场上一步一步的后退。国内的很多老百姓，他们说西方人怎么就不了解我们的真实情况？为什么不知道我们的真实的愿望呢？他们非常希望有人代表他们在国外说出这些真实的东西。我现在在替他们说话，这不就是一种很重要的工作吗？
So, especially in the last couple of years, because the Western countries have been retreating and retreating and retreating on the question of human rights in China. A lot of ordinary people, the people in China say, how come the Westerners don't understand us, and they don't understand what's really going in China, and they don't understand our real conditions. And so they are hoping for someone to represent them in the West to tell people what's really going on. So this is what I'm doing. Is this not an important role I'm playing?
另外，有许多西方国家的有许多过去的那个争取民主的这些反对派人士，到了西方以后，他们好像在一些人看来，他们好像慢慢的变得销声匿迹了。这有各种各样的原因。
And on the also some of the people who were active in the democracy movement have come out and become much less active, and people see this. There are many reasons for this.
一般人好多人以为是他们自然的就贬值了，但是实际上真正懂政治的很多人告诉我说，并不是那么回事儿。比如说苏联的布科夫斯基，他出来以后就坚决地替苏联老百姓说话，代表苏联老百姓批评西方政府的错误的政策。所以西方政府的官员们联合起来，使他逐渐的贬值。这是我在欧洲的时候，好几个政治家告诉我的。
So many people think that it's kind of a natural course of events that these people would lose their prestige and position coming out of their own countries. But people who really understand politics say that this is not the case. For example, Bukovsky coming out, he is actually, speaking for the ordinary people in the former Soviet Union and criticizing Western governments. And it's the Western governments getting together to say that the prestige of these people is getting lower.
他们告诉我这些话的目的呢，是出于好心，是想让我不要走布科夫斯基的老路，让我对西方政府说话的时候口气缓和一些。但是我认为，如果我在西方国家，我不能替我自己国家老百姓说话的话，那我才真正是贬值了呢。
And so the people are telling me this. People in Europe have told me this because they're being considerate, and they don't want me to make the same mistakes, as they say, as Bukovsky, but and that I should be gentler in criticizing Western governments. But I feel if I can't speak up on behalf of my people to the Western governments, then I really don't have anything going for me.
谢谢。
Hello, my name is Greg Polarowski, and I'm a first-year student at the law school. 我现在很感谢你到哈佛大学来和我们谈话。
你的中国话说得不错啊。
Your Chinese is good.
China is a proud nation with 4,000 years of. No, we'll go with the English on this one, I think. China is a proud nation with 4,000 years of history, but relatively recently has suffered a century of humiliation at the hands of Western imperialism. Today, China is rising again. You've pushed for the United States to encourage human rights in China, and my question is, would this help or hurt the human rights movement within China itself?
Will what help or hurt? Sorry.
Would the United States pushing for human rights in China help or hurt the human rights movement?
美国政府支持那个民运，是对民运有好处还是有坏处？就是美国政府。
前面说什么？
前面说的就是说，中国历史4000年悠久历史，最近100年受西方的压迫什么，他就是讲一下。
当然，你说的受西方压迫，这是一种很沉重的压迫。但是对于中国老百姓来说，他们主要受的是中国的这个专制主义政府的压迫。
Of course, the century of humiliation that you spoke of is heavy, but even heavier for the common Chinese people is the authoritarian government oppression.
在中国有学者统计过，就近100年以来，对外的战争，包括受外国侵略的战争中死的人，只是中国内战和内部由于压迫 死的人的1%。
Some scholars have calculated that over the last 100 years, the number of people who died in wars with the outside is only 1% of those who lost their lives in civil war and through oppression internal.
仅仅一个大跃进就饿死了8000万中国人，这是抗日战争死的人的3倍。
In the Great Leap Forward in China, as many as, sorry.
8000万，得算一算那数字。
80 million. As many as 80 million people lost their lives, and that's only, and that's 3 times 80 million. 80 million.
80 million.
And that's 3 times 3 times as many as died in World War II, I think he said.
所以对中国人民来说，怎么样反抗这个压迫，怎么样解除这种压迫，是他们最主要关心的问题。但是共产党呢，总想用什么外国侵略来掩盖这个最主要的问题。
And so what Chinese people are struggling against and protesting against is this kind of oppression, but the Chinese Communist Party is always trying to use foreign oppression to cover up this other.
你第2个问题，我回答起来就可能更简单了一点了。
So my answer to your second question is probably even simpler.
因为美国作为在这个世界上的最强大的国家，也是最主要的国家，如果他们能够坚决地支持中国人民争取民主的这个活动的话，当然对于中国的民主运动是一个很大的帮助。
That is, the United States, as the strongest, most powerful country in the world, if this country were to support human rights in China, of course that would be a great help.
Next question over here.
魏金正先生你好，我的名字是陈雪莉，是这里第2年的学生。Thank you very much for being here today. My whole family has followed your imprisonment with a lot of concern and a lot of indignation towards the Chinese government. So I'm really happy to have you here. My question is this. Deng Xiaoping is credited largely with bringing a lot of economic reform to China, and yet at the same time he's been criticized for his crackdown in Tiananmen Square. My question is what your thoughts are on how history will view Deng Xiaoping.
经济上改革是保育，可是有人批评他就是在天安门广场的这个起的作用，所以我想知道你个人对邓小平这个历史会怎么样评价邓小平？
我个人对邓小平的评价恐怕是不会太好。
My view of Deng Xiaoping probably is not so great.
很多人可能以为是个人原因，但是其实不是个人的原因。
Many people think that this is a personal thing, but actually it's not.
我始终认为我们俩之间的这种争论，或者我们俩之间的这种，比如他迫害我这种事情，完全是一种政治上的原因，而不是个人恩怨。
I feel that the argument between us, or the conflict between us, is actually not personal, but a political thing.
但是他在现代中国历史上，确实是一个很大的罪人，而不仅仅是犯错误的问题。
But I feel that in modern Chinese history, he's a real criminal, not just somebody who made mistakes.
他不仅是在天安门广场屠杀了几千的中国人，而且最主要是他沉重地打击了中国人的这个对美好事物的这种理想和希望，所以使得现在的最近10年以来的中国人的那个心态变得越来越恶劣，这是他要负主要责任的东西。
I feel that not only was he responsible for the death of the massacre of several thousand Chinese people on Tiananmen Square, but he also struck a huge blow to the ideals and the hopes of the Chinese people, so that, and this is his real crime.
大家都知道89年那场事情，都可能知道的比我还要多。那个时候不仅是天安门广场，整个中国的老百姓 都把人那个内心里最好的、最善良的一面全都拿出来了。在北京，甚至连小偷都不偷东西了。大家都知道中国快要有一个非常美好的前途了。这个时候，他用坦克车、用机关枪给大家当头一棒。你想想，这对整个中国的社会和整个中国的文化是一种多么沉重的打击。
So, everyone knows what happened in 1989 probably better than I do, and not just in Tiananmen Square, but all over China. Really, there was great joy, and all the good things were happening, and they say that even the what do you call it, thieves were not operating during that time, and just at that, on the verge of this great happening, Deng Xiaoping sent tanks and smashed this movement, and see what a great blow that is to all of Chinese society and all of Chinese culture.
即使你做过再多的好事，也无法掩盖这么巨大的罪恶。这个罪恶太深重了。
No matter how many good things you've done, it's not enough to cover up this crime.
我想邓小平他自己肯定是明白这一点。
I think Deng Xiaoping himself must have understood this.
所以我写信骂他以后，我没有发现他再进一步迫害我。
And so when I wrote to him in anger, he didn't argue with me anymore.
而且在93年他死以前吧，在93年的时候，是他亲自签字释放了我，这等于是违背了他自己的一个诺言。所以我觉得他在内心里也明白他自己犯了多大的罪。
And in 1993, he personally signed my release, and which really means he went back on his promise. So I think that shows that he really knew how great his crime was.
Hi, my name is Thomas Wu. I'm a senior at the college. 韦金生先生，欢迎您来哈佛。我的问题跟刚才提的两个问题有些关系。您提出一些例子，说别的国家的民主运动，曾经起源过国外的运动。我的问题是，您认为海外民运对中国的民主运动能够有多大的影响？应该有多大影响？
The question is that you mentioned that several other democracy movements in other countries had their origin outside of that country. So my question is, do you feel that, what do you feel can be the influence of the overseas democracy movement on the democracy movement in China, and what should it be?
首先我得纠正一个用词儿啊，就是说不是说起源于海外，而是在某种情况下，在国内无法进行组织工作的时候，先在国外发展一段时间，然后再回到国内去发展。
Just want to clear up the terminology. I didn't say that they originated outside of the country, but I said that when they were not able to organize within the country, they started organizing outside the country.
实际上，89年之后呢，89年那个事件发生之后，国内的很多老百姓、很多的普通人都对跑到海外的这些民运人士寄予这样的希望，希望大家在海外发展的组织工作呀，各个方面政治工作、外交工作搞得更好之后，有机会再回到国内来。
And actually, after the incident in '89, the ordinary people in China had this hope for the people who were able to to go outside of China, that they would organize and be able to do things outside of China and then go back.
但是由于各种各样大家都知道的原因，总之在海外的中国民运呢，搞的情况不是很好，现在是越来越处于低潮了。所以我们现在所有的中国人都应该想一想，我们怎么样在海外能够不辜负国内那些老百姓对我们的期望。
And so, for reasons that everybody knows, various reasons, the democracy movement outside of China really failed to organize, to go ahead and develop. And so, we Chinese should really think, how can we how can we not let them down? How can we not let our Chinese people down, and what can we do to make good on their hopes and desires?
不仅我累了，南希女士也累了啊。现在我觉得
He says, I'm
实在对不起
tired,
大家，我身体不
Nancy's
太好
tired,
啊。
I'm sorry, my health is not very good.
希望大家能，我们以后还会见面的。
So we can have a chance to see each other again.
We thank you all for coming, and especially we thank Wei Jingsheng for coming and pushes his health as far as he could. Thank you very much.